All right, team, we're live streaming now, just to let you know. And as soon as Councillor Buswell comes back, we will start the meeting. Just for the community board members, I just checked and I thought you'd give you a little bit of a heads up. Today's agenda for strategy and ops is quite light. You'll see there's the COVID update on there, which the agenda's light in terms of item numbers. Obviously, COVID update's important. But then after item 10, you'll see we go into public exclusion, which is around the major events funding, and that's a councillor-only session. So it will be a reasonably short meeting, depending on how many questions there are for community board members today. So I just thought, rather than you find out later, give you a heads up now once we move into PE. So...
Thank you, James. Thank you.
All good, Kathy. Right. Well, good morning, everyone. Morena, welcome to the Strategy and Operations meeting for Thursday, the 4th of November. We'll just move through to the council blessing, which Councillor Holborough is going to read out.
Ia mātua whiriwhiri ana ina taka ki mua i o mātua aroaro. E pono ana mātua ka kaha tonu ki te whakapau mahara huapai mō na hapori e mahi ne mātua. Me kaha hoki mātua katoa ki a whaihua, ki a tōtika te mahu mahi a matamaia, te tira whakamua me te hihiri, ka taia te arahi i roto i te kotahitanga me te aroha.
Kia ora. Thank you, Janet. I'm just going to go to Councillor Buswell. She has a little bit that she wants to just raise before we move on to the next item.
Morena, I would just like to recognise Parihaka Day, which is on the 5th of November, and it's out of respect and I guess to highlight the connection that we have in Kapiti with the iwi from Te Atiawa coming from Taranaki. They were obviously quite involved in the Parihaka days, and I just thought, out of respect, I'd like to highlight that special day for them in our country for the 5th of November.
Thanks, Angela. So we now move on to item number 3, apologies. And we have apologies from Councillor Pravanov, who's unable to be here today. And I'll just have a quick look at Tanika. I think that's all we've got. Thank you. And just noting too that we have got Councillor Bernie Randall via Zoom. So as per usual, Councillor, I will try to remember to come to you at the end of the staff intros to the reports, and just see if you have any questions as well, so you're not missed. Move on to...
Sorry, Mr Chair, I just want to note that I'm here instead of Marilyn because she's given her apologies, so I'm attending instead.
Yep, not a problem. Thanks, Cam. So move on to item number 4, declarations of interest. Anyone got any declarations they want to declare? Not seeing any. Item number 5, public speaking time. There is none. So item 6, members' business. There is no responses to 6A. For the mover and second, apologies, thank you. So just going back to the apologies, if we could have somebody that move those apologies. Moved by His Worship the Mayor, seconded by Councillor McCann. All those in favour say aye. Aye, against, carried. Thanks, Tanika. Item 6B, any leave of absence? Councillor Buswell.
Next Tuesday the 9th.
Tuesday the 9th of November? Okay, someone want to move those? Moved by Councillor Holborough, seconded by Councillor Elliott. All those in favour say aye. Aye, against, carried. I'll let you two sort that one out. Matters of an urgent nature. I am not aware of any being raised with the Chair prior to the meeting, so we'll now move on to item number 7.1, which is the COVID-19 recovery update, and invite Natasha to the table. Morena.
Morena koutou, everyone. For this presentation, I will at one point hand over to Mr James Jefferson down the back there. There are some slides there that he will talk to. So just as a bit of context to this update, in the policy work program, there was a commitment to review our COVID recovery plan before the end of the year. As of the commencement of the Delta outbreak in August, we revisited whether or not that was the right timing for that. And so what we have done in terms of bringing this update to you now is to expand this into a broader update about where things are at with COVID more broadly. We'll cover off through that both response and recovery. So between James and I, what we are going to cover, we're going to start off with a bit of an update on New Zealand's approach to COVID. We'll talk a bit about vaccination and the progress we're making locally on that. Then I'll hand over to James, who will talk about the response locally through the August lockdown. I will also talk a bit about the business support provided through that as well. And then I'll move on to talking a bit about recovery and the monitoring that's going on that. So where is New Zealand at with COVID? Obviously, the August Delta outbreak has changed the landscape in terms of what we're dealing with and what things are going to look like from here. The government has changed its strategy. It's shifted to a very clear suppression strategy in Auckland. It is still aiming for elimination in the rest of New Zealand for as long as possible. There's a clear recognition from the government that it's not going to be possible to keep COVID out of the rest of the country. So it is very much in a transition phase to a new approach. There's a lot of uncertainty through this, but one thing we do know is that the next 12 months is going to be very different than the last 12 months. Vaccination is very much a key to managing the health impacts and pressure on the health system of COVID. Globally, what we are seeing, even in countries that have had good vaccine rates, however, is that some of them have been in a position of having to reintroduce restrictions to avoid the health system being overwhelmed. And both Singapore and Ireland are key countries where that's happened over the last month or so. And it's increasingly being referred to in a range of different countries as a pandemic of the unvaccinated. So the government, in response to dealing with this transition that's needed, has introduced a new COVID protection framework. And I have got some handouts of what this looks like, which is a little bit more complicated than the than the previous 4-level lockdown. In terms of when this new protection framework will come into force, what the government has said to date is that when Auckland's 3 DHBs reach 90% double vaccinated, that area will move to this COVID protection framework, and the rest of the country will move once every DHB reaches 90%, and that we will move to the orange setting. The exception may be the South Island if the DHBs in the South Island reach 90% earlier. So vaccination certificates is a key plank to this new system, and under that approach, everything remains open and gathering limits can be lifted where vaccine certificates are being used. There is a different approach that sits in place for businesses that choose not to use them. The intention from the government is to move away from having national lockdowns, but there is still very much the potential for regionalised ones, and you'll see that in terms of what's happened in the far north just over the last couple of days. So that's what the protection framework looks like, as you can see from in front of you. It's a bit of a busy picture. There is a bit to work through in terms of making sure we all understand that, and so it's good that the government has released this well in advance of when it might actually come into force. In terms of the vaccination rates, I'll just take you through this diagram because it's not very clear. As a district, we are split, as you know, between 2 district health boards. In terms of how those 2 district health boards are progressing, the top half of that with the red circles shows how both Mid-Central and Capital and Coast are progressing with first vaccinations reaching 90%, and the bottom one with the 2 green circles shows how those 2 DHBs are progressing for second doses. So both of them have got a wee way to go before we get there. Just noting with all of these statistics that I put up there around vaccination rates and numbers, as soon as I pull them off an internet website, they're immediately out of date. That's just the pace of how things are moving. So what this does show is, so Mid-Central Health, in terms of first doses, is around about 86%. Have first doses. Capital and Coast, 91% have first doses, and this is of eligible population. Of the second doses, 72% have second doses and 78% of Capital and Coast. In terms of breaking that down in a more local picture, and I will note here that this information has been pulled from the Capital and Coast statistics. So what we are finding with the data and the way it's reported is Capital and Coast will break things down into a Kapiti Coast district, but it excludes the data from the Otaki part of the district because that's not within Capital and Coast's area. So this data does need to be taken with a grain of salt, and I will tell you why in the next couple of slides. So locally, we are making good progress. More than 90% of Kapiti Coast residents south of Otaki have had a first dose, and we've got a reasonably good number booked in for their second dose as well. So what this graph here shows is a breakdown into the SA2, the statistical areas. So you've got a bit of a smaller breakdown. They're sort of smaller than suburbs. The key thing I just wanted to emphasise with this, because this does show the Otaki areas up in the top, is that what you'll see, the lighter colours are the areas where there is a lower coverage of vaccination rates. So that Otaki area and Paraparaumu East Central are areas for us to be watching in terms of some of the lower turnout for getting vaccinations. Yeah, people are looking. I will note that this data is a little bit old, so it's about a fortnight old in terms of when the data was pulled, but the basic principle is going to be the same.
So it was pulled after Super Saturday?
It was the 20th of October it was pulled. Super Saturday was the 18th? 16th? Thank you. This just shows a similar data, just cut in a different way. Again, the lighter areas, so what you've got there on the, don't focus on the detail, just focus on the colours. The left three columns breaks it down into Māori and Pacific. The very left-hand one is the total vaccination rates. So it gives you a bit of an ethnicity breakdown there. You've got the first three columns are the first dose. The next three are the fully vaccinated, and then the next three from there to the right shows of the total eligible population from a numbers breakdown.
So this is the communities of interest in a different cut.
Yeah, yes, and it goes from north to south across the district as well. So again, it's just another picture of showing that at the top part of the district there, you've got some lighter colours showing through. The third eligible population. So that's of everyone who's older than 12 who's able to get a cut. So, and it's of numbers of people who are residents in that area. So moving away from the vaccination numbers now and turning to a bit of a breakdown around how response and recovery has been going for us. Just in terms of what we'll go through here, I'll hand over to James shortly, and he will talk about the resurgence planning. Then I'll come back to me and I'll talk about where we're at with recovery and some of the monitoring of some key statistics or key measures around recovery and how the district and region are faring. And then very briefly talk about organisational readiness and elected members' role in that. Over to you, James.
Good morning, everyone. Mr Chair, Mr Mayor, councillors and community board members, good morning. With your indulgence, Chair, can I talk from here rather than rushing up and grabbing the pointer off Natasha? And are you comfortable for me just to talk to these next few slides from here?
Absolutely,
Thank
Mr
you.
Jefferson. But before you do, I thought I'd take the opportunity because we have fewer opportunities at the moment with COVID to acknowledge you and your team for the IANZ accreditation. So I know that there's lots of emails going backwards and forwards, but I thought that I would do that just publicly today because I don't know when the next opportunity would be to do so. The stellar work that the team have done there to retain their accreditation. and the leadership that you've shown and your team to get there. So I know a number of councillors have expressed that by email. I just thought I'd express that publicly. And if you could pass that feedback on from all of us elected members to the team. So
I
thank
will,
you.
and look, I've been passing on your emails, councillors. Thank you. They're really well received by the team, and they're really encouraged. And trust me, on Friday last, there was a huge sense of relief in the Tight Five, and I met with the auditors, and it was a very different meeting than the meeting first thing on Tuesday morning. It's an interesting experience. I'm happy to share that offline, but thank you. I really appreciate that. So Natasha, that next slide. Look, I put this not that I believe for a second you can read this. Because of the fine print. But I put this up just to demonstrate. If you remember last year when we were in the middle of the first lockdown, I presented a slide that showed how all of these things fitted together, Ministry of Health and DPMC, and that was really complicated, and we struggled with all the arrows and the thing. This is the 2021 version. Actually, it's no less complicated. And I guess I put it up there just to show that no matter how frustrated we get at the front end, where the rubber meets the road with our communities, as a country, the systems that go to support our response to COVID are pretty bloody complex. And with any system or organisational behaviour, there are gaps, and we'll talk about that. Natasha's already alluded to that in terms of where we source the data, one source of truth that actually looks at the district as a whole rather than DHB. But look, I'd like elected members to take their hands off their laptops now, and I've got a peanut slab for anyone. In the top left-hand corner of that flow diagram is Odesk. It's part of the puzzle. Does anyone know who Odesk is? And there's a peanut slab on up for grabs if you do. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's. And actually, I did exactly the same thing, and it still took me about 10 minutes to find what it is. So it's the Officials Committee for Domestic and External Security. So
You should know that. We talked about that.
So when you look at all the bits there, there's DPMC at the top. When you come down the right-hand side, you're getting closer to us as a council. You've got the Regional Joint Committee, you've got the Wellington Response Group, the Wellington Regional Leadership Group in that bigger box down the right-hand side, KEG, and I think we need a couple of KEGs when we finally come out of COVID, but that's a different conversation, I guess. Then right at the bottom, left-hand corner, is local government. And so really the purpose for putting that up there is just to demonstrate how complex the system and the processes are around an appropriate on-the-ground response that's going to protect our communities. Maybe they'll use the same model. So look, if we flip that, the next slide, Natasha, please. If we flip that and say, what does it look like from the ground up, and how easy is it to access food, household goods and accommodation where needed? And you remember back to last year, we were inundated with requests for both. It's actually no less complex. And if you're a person in urgent need and you've got to navigate the system, it can be daunting. The flip side, I have to say, my experience here in Kapiti was, and I'll touch on it further on, and sorry, my apologies, I meant to say that Renee Corlett from Remo has come to join us this morning. She's our Community Resilience Advisor and may be able to help us, Natasha and I, navigate some of the questions you might have through this process, and might be able to provide some insights as to what's coming out of Wellington. But I have to say, at an operational level and on the ground, actually access to food worked really, really well this time round, to the best of our knowledge. And I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. Next slide, thank you. So Kapiti resurgence planning, given all of those constraints that I've talked about, you'll recall last year we developed our own resurgence plan based on the Wellington regional one, which was based on the national one, and we just Kapiti-ized it and made it a little bit more accessible for our people. We have continued to polish that and refine it, and we were due to do that again, but given the traffic light system that Natasha put up earlier, and I've got a big A3 copy to put in the councillors' lounge for those that are optically challenged or chronologically challenged like I am. I'll put that in the councillors' lounge for you to have a look at. We will do the refinement of the resurgence plan after we get more clarity around the traffic light system. What we did through the development and the polishing of our current plan is a clear articulation of roles and responsibilities. Although when I first put R&R up there, I did think about rest and relaxation, which I'm sure we'd all like a wee bit of. But we were really clear, and again, I've got a handout for each of you to take away after this that articulate the roles and responsibilities of all of the agencies across the board, just for your reference, and I think understanding who's doing what. We worked really hard over the last year as an organisation to get our incident management team really ready for what we knew was coming. So the IMT is the desk leads. If you recall back to the your induction when Remo talked about emergency management and the 4 Rs and the number of functions, so they are intelligence, planning, PIM, which is absolutely critical for us, logistics, operations, and welfare. So the six functions largely. There's a couple of other ones, but each of those has a desk lead or 2 desk leads, and we worked really hard with the desk leads to make sure that we were match fit and match ready when the next wave came. Technology checks and familiarization. I'll talk on that before. Some of the learnings out of last year was the systems were clunky and people were unfamiliar with them, and that inhibited the ease with which requests flowed, those sorts of things. And early mobilisation, I stood that IMT up, put them on standby the week before we went into lockdown on the Tuesday 17th. It was quite clear in the information we were getting through Remo that that's where we were heading, so we stood them up early. Next slide, thanks. So what was our mission and what were the roles and responsibilities? Look, quite simply, our mission was to stop the spread of COVID into this community, and we appear to have been successful to date, and some of that is good planning and some of it is luck, I suspect. We certainly, as a region, dodged a bullet on Queen's birthday weekend when we had the chap from Sydney and his partner. That certainly got all of our attention and made us go back to the drawing board and look at our systems. So how are we going to stop the spread of COVID? Well, this comes to the roles and responsibilities of us as an organisation, and our role is largely support, and it's driven and focused around intelligence gathering and that situational awareness that we need you out in community be feeding back up to us and telling us, along with our partner agencies, what's happening on the ground. So intelligence, and that key one, that public messaging is critical, and we are blessed here to have a really good comms PIM team, I think, who are very responsive and anticipate well. Where required, operational, that second bullet point, operational coordination. So if it was an earthquake, we'd be spending a lot more staff on the ground, and the ops team managed that. There wasn't so much operational coordination required during this last lockdown, and welfare. And again, that third bullet point, stressing that point that we lead the provision of emergency welfare support when everything else is exhausted. And it goes back to that earlier flow diagram of how to access food under urgency, and actually it worked really well here because of the volunteer organisations and the food banks and those. It worked really well alongside MSD, who were very well resourced and very responsive this time round. Situational awareness, as I say, and really relying on people like yourself that are strongly connected to community, bubbling that information. Actually you're missing something. There's a group here that are not being supported, and that last one, supporting those community groups. And again, you may have some questions or feedback for us. Renee did some amazing work in working with the volunteer groups. So next slide. So we debriefed about 2 weeks after we came out of lockdown, and we asked partner agencies and the staff how we found it this time. And there's some of the things that came through. That smooth, calm, quiet. It wasn't as manic as last year. You remember we were getting pulled in 1,000 different ways. We were focused. There was really clear focus on our roles and responsibilities right back through Remo up to NEMA. That made things easier and a much more professional response. Partnership and flow being joined up. I talked about MSD. We got no calls for service, so that on the right-hand side, that low request for service, we got no calls for service around urgent food provision, unlike last time where we got a small number but really complex needs. But MSD were really awesome, certainly locally, in responding to that this time. And then the volleys is no disrespect at all. It's something that is a highlight is the relationship that we've been able to develop with the volunteer organisations, and Renee was the coordinator for that, and that made sure there was no gaps and helped things flow smoothly and calmly. And we think there was a focused professional response in partnership right across the district. So next slide. You're nearly done from hearing from me. So what worked well so far is to say we anticipated and we were prepared. We were match fit, I believe. We hit the ground running, and when we did activate on the Tuesday, we were up and running. Actually, it was on the Wednesday, full activation within 30 minutes. Staff commitment was simply amazing. A lot of people working out of the comfort zone. You've heard me talk about how difficult it is to roster enough people on to keep people fresh, not getting burnt out. We had a lot of new staff come on. The second to last bullet point, there was the experienced staff sharing their knowledge and experience in a safe environment for new staff, and that was a real highlight for us. Great partnership with Remo. The technology worked well. We did some tsunami exercises, and I did an unannounced exercise earlier in the year around COVID, and we were pretty much match fit, and we applied the learnings, particularly out of tsunami exercise where the technology was really clunky. It worked really well this time and really helped. And that last bullet point, good local connection strengthened. And I think for the next time, and I believe there will be a next time, don't want to be a prophet of doom, but I think you'd have to be naive to think that with everything that's happening, we won't have some more lockdowns. I think we're well positioned to respond. What wasn't so good, FINA, is the national system for recording and managing needs assessment. That is still, feedback I've had is that it's still really clunky, and had we needed to use that, it wasn't going to work, so we fed that back up through Remo. Not the only ones to experience that around the country. The volume and duplication of information is daunting, as I'm sure you often see. You're tempted not to read anything, but at the end of the day, you're left with that nagging thought, what am I missing? What critical stuff am I missing? Again, we fed that up through to NEMA, saying, is there a better way of distributing the information and the requests? Rostering, as I've indicated, was stretched. We're working on that. And the last bit, as Natasha alluded to earlier on, really constricted data flow, particularly from DHBs. And that leaves us half blind, feeling half blind, and you're stumbling around in the dark to know how to respond. And again, I can't thank the Mayor and the CE enough. They've escalated that at every opportunity they've had. So looking forward, as I said, we under the current regime, the local resurgence plan is fit for purpose. We will review that once we get more detail on the traffic light system at the end of the month. And we'll bring that back. I don't suspect our roles and responsibilities will change hugely. And again, I'll hand out that A3 that just alludes to that. Although I have a nagging doubt at the back of my mind that as we move to more self-isolation, I suspect there might be a request for local government to assist police and health, who are certainly in the Auckland context struggling to monitor compliance as more people move into self-isolation. So I suspect that's a request that might come to us next year. That's it from me. Happy to take any questions if you think it appropriate to do that now, or do you want to leave until, I think Natasha's got a few more slides.
Thanks, James. I just checked with Natasha in between there, and we're going to pause there for a minute, take some questions, and then Natasha's still got 2 or 3 slides left. Just before I move to Councillor Elliott, one thing that was obvious after the first lockdown is the community's lack of understanding or knowledge or appreciation of how many staff were actually involved. And I think I remember the Chief Executive saying at times up to 60 staff out of our organisation in level one, the first lockdown. Do you want to just touch a little bit, and whether you or Wayne wants to, in terms of when you look at council's BAU, business as usual, that what this actually means to the organisation in terms of drain on resources. I specifically think back to the Martin Jenkins review number 1, and then the Gateway review, which talks about small teams, and then when stuff like this comes on, how it distracts them from their day-to-day job. So it might just be helpful for elected members and any public listening to understand that in terms of the work that you and your team are doing in the background.
Look, thanks through the chair, and I'm happy to take the first stab, and if Wayne needs to polish it or anything. Look, it is, we did talk about the rostering. We ran light again this time. We were able to do that, but that still required about 25 staff. And you need to run shifts, because whilst I talked about it being calmer and things flowed better this time, still a lot of stress for staff, particularly new staff who are learning and go, God, I don't want to drop the ball. My role's really important. So we ran 2 shifts as we did last year. People were so focused on making sure they didn't drop the ball on their BAU that when they finished usually about 5 or 6 o'clock on the ELC roster, they go back and dive into the BAU. Now that's unsustainable. They end up doing 2 jobs. I don't know what the answer is, and we do need to look at it. And we just, when we go into the next one, we're going to have to say no to some BAU because it's not sustainable. And we've tried to roster our staff in a way that they come from more discretionary parts of the organisation, but that becomes really difficult. People's personal circumstances, when you start to layer those things in, it means you're pulling from a fairly small pool to be able to roster properly. So I think that actually we're in difficult times and the challenging times, and some BAU just will have to be put on hold. But certainly I have felt from this table no pressure or difficulty with that, as long as you're kept informed, and if we got to that point, we would be saying that to you.
Thanks, James, and I think that's helpful for elected members to know that sometimes when our responses aren't always in a timely manner, that there's often a reason behind that as well. Yeah, sure, Mr. Maxwell.
Even though I said I wouldn't, I just want to add one bit. As you've heard, the one team that was completely switched over was the comms team. So basically running 2 shifts, comms was the whole job. So not looking at any councillors in particular when I say sometimes discussions about our ability to do comms in other spaces at those times overlooks the fact that the entire team is doing that in the 2 shifts. And so that's one example where when we say it might be 25 staff, it's actually an entire team or 2 that are taken out of action, and it is most of that 25, apart from that, are Tier 3 managers. So not always, but a lot of people who are actually responsible for keeping the mouse wheel turning are off doing something else. So I just want to stress that it isn't as straightforward as saying, 25 spread across the organisation. That's not so bad. It is bad, and in this world with the government hoovering up staff all over the place, it's actually really hard to find anyone else to fill the gaps too.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. That's helpful for us to understand, at least in terms of the pressure that's on the organisation. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you very much. I've got 2 questions, but good to see Mr. CE, into a suggestion I have for comms, and that is that I notice a lot of people feel as though COVID is something that happens in other parts of the country. However, I just wanted to highlight that in the very first lockdown, the first death was an elderly woman in the West Coast. The second death was an elderly retired gentleman from MetLife Care, a block away, and his wife was in ICU for a long, long time. And perhaps that's something to put into our comms messaging. Hi Renee, really good to see you back. Just a suggestion that perhaps, given this is an ongoing situation, that there is some comms put into people's preparedness around especially getting food supplies in, and probably more than usual at this time over summer. And thirdly, while Renee's here, there I just have another question about our general messaging and about our phone alert system, which seems in earthquakes now is going off for some and not for others. So I'm just going to capture you while you're here and just ask if you could give us an update on the phone alert system. Thank you.
Yeah, and good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see you in person again. It's been a very long time. I've been squirreled away in the EOC for a while now during response. So the question with the earthquake alerts is a really interesting one and a really valuable one. So what's happened there is Google, as an international organisation, has decided, without consulting civil defence, us or the government in any way, that we're going to be a pilot country, us and Greece. We're going to be a pilot country for their new earthquake alerts that work off the, it's like a gyroscope or something inside your cell phone. And so they are collecting data and causing dismay across New Zealand. So that's what's happened there. And because people who have Google phones, so it's only if you have a Google phone and only if you have kind of one of the later phones that has this accelerometer inside it, that you'll get the notification. They didn't put out any comms around that, and we certainly didn't get any warning of what they were planning to do. And so there's a lot of catch-up messaging where people are really unsure, and in some ways, because they're such an international organisation, we are also, if they want to put software on their phone, then we don't have a lot of say about what they put, other than saying maybe you could have given us a heads up. But
you obviously didn't read the 76 pages of terms and agreement when you did your update.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone just scrolls to the bottom and clicks yes. Yeah, I'll definitely escalate that up. I'm sure that throughout New Zealand, that's something that we've seen come up, and I'll pass that on to our marketing and comms team. Apart from the messaging that we put out on Facebook after something happens, I think that is something that should be looked at on a wider scale, because at first it was just the one trial, but now it's actually happening quite regularly. So
thanks, Renee.
I'll definitely escalate that.
Going to go to your worship, the Mayor.
Yeah, question to Mr. Jefferson. It's not a question of if, it's when. So when it happens here on the Kapiti Coast, who tells who, and then how do we operate in terms of letting the elected members know? Because the first impact will be this psychological impact in the community. And I would assume that the general population, the good citizens of Kapiti, would want to contact their elected members and say what's happening. It's happened before. So can you describe so that we are pre-warned? And I go back to the point when we had that exercise, the shakeout exercise. I remember Deputy Mayor clearly saying that we should be warned, especially the women, so that they are dressed adequately. So I'm just asking for us to be psychologically dressed.
Just
so
before you respond to, I think earlier you talked about a handout around roles and response. Did I hear you right there? So I don't know whether that might help in terms of the response.
Yeah, so look, in addition to the handout, which I'll get Tanika to hand out now, it's just insightful, but I'll also send you the link. I think, again, in your induction, there was a booklet that we gave you back, what it was, 2 years ago now, I guess, on your role in the various stages of those 4 hours. I'll send that out electronically rather than print out 37 copies. I'll send that out. But to come to your answer your question, Mr. Mayor, thank you through the chair. Just referencing the death that Councillor Elliott touched on before, EOC and as the lead controller, I heard about that through the media. So that is a demonstration of that first chart that I put up. So DPMC will probably tell ODASC, who will probably tell somebody who will tell somebody else, and they'll forget about that little box down in the left-hand corner that is local government. And I think that's the place we need to get that. In fact, it's timely that Natasha's left that slide. That constricted flow of data. And there was something, I forget where it was, earlier this week. Actually, it was up north. It was the pub owner up north who heard through community that COVID was back in the community up there, and he closed his pub. And I thought, there's another example of community hearing through social media and those sorts of things before we do. I haven't got an answer. You will know as soon as I know. But in terms of how it gets to us and who it gets through to before us, all I can ask is that CAG and regional leadership, if that's something that can be constantly, hey, we are where the rubber meets the road, particularly for that psychological impact initially when it comes.
So through all the events in the last couple of years, sometimes I have received a phone call between 5 and 20 minutes before the public announcement, sometimes, but it's a little sporadic and I'm not sure on what basis they sometimes decide to tell me and sometimes didn't quite get around to it. So what Mr. Jefferson is saying is quite true. The second we hear something, we will obviously share it, but you might appreciate that if those things are particularly unexpected, I'll probably be doing something else, like in a meeting here, and I'll ignore my phone. So with the best will in the world, quite often we're all going to hear when the PM or someone is standing up in front of the lectern telling us what's going on.
Thanks, Wayne. And I see I've got Renee there as well.
Yeah, and we have noticed that in the kind of subsequent responses that NEMA and ODIS has tightened up on information a lot. There have been incidents of personal information that's been leaked around COVID that's been leaked to the media, and so we've noticed that that's starting to tighten up. But as you know, as Wayne said, as soon as we know, we get on it and share that information.
Thanks, Renee. Councillor Halliday.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things, but I know we definitely we didn't know what we didn't know back then, and we've had a bit of time. I think everyone's a lot more comfortable in that space with regards to what's coming, because it is coming. But look, I appreciate we've got all the internal structures, and you talk about the intel coming inwards to the organisation, but I just wanted to touch on what the community will potentially see. And I know there'll be generic information from government, and we're mandated to follow that. But I was just curious whether we'll have sort of information that's specific to Kapiti on our website that will help ease people's or ability to find things or be updated with what's going on locally as such.
Can I just check too on that just before you answer? It goes back to roles and responsibilities, like whether that's creating that information is council's role or whether it's the DHB and so forth. So.
Just back through the chair, thank you. I think you're absolutely right. It's really understanding which information that we can manipulate and Kapiti-ise, and what is the risk to that? Do we end up, and I think we've got a really good PIM team who manage that risk well. Look, I think there is room for improvement, or there's potential as we go into a new system. What it means for Kapiti in peacetime, in the green, should look the same across the country, but where there is an incident or where we go into lockdown, then postcode. I talked last year about postcode lockdown. I think potentially even under the traffic, more so with the traffic light system, we may head there, and that's where we start to then, what does this mean for Kapiti? And I think there is a role for us to provide more information. Having said that, I know the Parihaka Informed Communities did a lot of work on their website, and it was just managing that information that was available to us nationally. So there's kind of a tension there, but where there is Kapiti specific stuff, then I think yes, we should be putting that up on our different forums, and I know the PIM team will be well placed to do that.
And if I may add, through you, Mr. Chair, that's fine when it comes to things like who do you contact for certain bits of information that are specific to Kapiti, such as, where's my local food bank? What I want to remind us all is certainly in the first lockdown, people started getting fixated on some really low-level grassroots details as if that was going to help solve the problem. So they were fixated on who was it and where was it, who was the problem. And that's not helping solve the problem. So what we've got to do is keep ourselves away from, I want to know where that case was. Was it Raumati or was it Otaki? As you know, we worried that people started to get victimised if you got into that space. So I just want to stress that the right information being available is important, but with the way these numbers are going to roll, we are not going to be saying, and there was 2 in Raumati and 1 in Parapara-Umu, and they lived at such and such. So just please bear that in mind.
All right. Councillor, just...
Yeah, look, it just sort of leads on to something else. I appreciate that DHBs will be responsible for the response with regards to people that are sick or where the check-ins are going to be. But I think it would be important to have that information certainly linked onto our site sooner rather than later when we get there, just so people know where to go for checkups or to get tested or that sort of scenario. That which would be very specific to our areas.
There is actually a lot of information, local information available. It's just hard to source through. So the PIM team are continually looking at the links that they can put up, but actually when you navigate through either COVID-19 website or MOH website, there is actually a lot of local information. And I ended up through this last lockdown asking the teams to give me intel that actually was in the system somewhere. It's just a bit clunky to find. So that is something front and centre for the PIM team in particular. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Holborough? Sorry, Deputy Mayor.
No, Councillor's fine. Thank you so much, and it's just incredible the work that's being done, and good to see you here again, Renee. Thanks for coming. I'm just a little bit unsure how this matrix works, because under some of them there are highlighted boxes with activities in them, and then some columns just seem to be empty, like social service capability is in place to support the community. That whole row is unpopulated. Can you just help me out a little bit to understand?
Chair, I think we've given all the copies out. It was really just to give you an idea of, I presume, thanks, Tanika, always the risk of giving handouts during rather than after, but it's a good question. Councillor, what page are you on? I'm running. Do you know why they're blank? Look, it may be. I can get clarification
yes.
for you. Oh,
Yes.
have a second.
I do know. It's because that information is covered in our welfare plan. We've got quite an in-depth, pages and pages of quite an in-depth Wellington Regional Welfare Plan. So that information is in there and hasn't been duplicated in that one.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe it would help just to have a note to say that, and so that all the information is here, because otherwise it's a little bit unclear. Also, along the top, local government actually isn't mentioned in terms of having any kind of role in any of this, including, so there's the Wellington CDM group and local EOCs, and the Wellington Leadership Group, which have membership from the council, but there's no column specifically for council, which kind of speaks to the question that the Mayor had, which was, what's our role in a resurgence in terms of communicating information?
Thank you. Back through the chair. Bear in mind this is a REMO document, and it is based on the premise that we're operating under the emergency management provisions, and that council's role in the provision of those services would be picked up by the ELC. Under that, we, in essence, in an emergency, the ELC is council, notwithstanding there's a delineation under the surface, but for this is I'm not sure that helps, but this is an emergency management document, and council's role is picked up under the ELC requirements.
yeah, I think it's really good to have that clarified, that under an emergency, that's our role under the EOC. Yeah, I think that's really good to have that highlighted, and this matrix makes that clear. So I had another question about further on in the agenda today, we're discussing major events, and I don't know if this is the place to ask this question, but whose responsibility is it to ensure that events are running safely? We have advice out there and some general guidelines, and there seems to be a variety of responses to those guidelines. Particularly, I'm thinking large mass gatherings outside. What's the current kind of advice around that, and how is it monitored, if you like, by anybody? I just think it's going to get more important as summer rolls on. I know we've got the traffic light system coming, but at the moment we don't have that. And in the meantime, we've got a couple of major events which are planned for our district. How do we ensure that those people are providing for people's safety? And if it's not our role, whose is it?
We've got Natasha that's going to respond to that.
Yeah, look,
Sorry, facing in the wrong direction.
I heard everything you said. We'll pick that up again through the major events discussion, but there is some work that's been done in terms of the event organisers preparing plans to show how they're going to handle and how they're going to handle COVID and make sure that participants can be safe as part of that. So ultimately it does fall back to the event organisers making sure that they can safely run an event in whatever conditions COVID throws at them at the time, and that's probably all. I'll leave it at that at this point in time, and we can pick that up again through the paper later.
Yeah, so the other paper is in public excluded, so I'm quite interested to have this discussion in open session as a more general kind of discussion, and I'm also concerned about events that aren't council funded. Who then monitors or keeps an eye on those? There's a lot of inconsistency at the moment, and I just want some clarification around that.
Yeah, I just thank you, Councillor, because it is a concern to me that we don't have a power to say yes or no to events, and what we're seeing around the region is varying responses. So from memory, the Wellington Marathon was cancelled, but we've got similar things going ahead because they're comfortable that they have mitigated the risks adequately. We don't have a controlling role in that other than things like whether we approve a traffic management plan. So pretty indirect ways. And so I'd be happy if Natasha talks a bit more publicly about those sorts of things that event organisers do, and if you do know who they have to, if they have to get approval from anyone else, who they go to.
Thank you, Wayne. So there is no approval they need to get from any other party. One thing we have done through looking at the major events applications that came in is there is some guidance that's been provided by the World Health Organization in terms of running events, and that's a risk assessment matrix basically that we've had done a brief assessment running through in terms of getting an understanding of which events might be higher risk and which events might be lower risk. So things like the marathon that Wayne referred to, the fact that it's outdoors, things like that are positive for an event because it does mean that you're in a lower risk environment rather than an enclosed indoor venue where people are really packed in quite tightly. So there is a loose assessment that we have done, and the reason I say loose is because we don't necessarily have a responsibility for checking or approving that kind of stuff, but we have factored that into some of the considerations in terms of the major events.
So where we're not funding events, what's our role? Do we have any kind of role at all?
We don't have a role other than what Wayne indicated in terms of traffic management and whether or not they meet the district plan requirements around events.
But I think what I heard James say earlier too, that may come in time around the regulatory response. So I don't know whether you wanted to comment.
That's absolutely right. Currently, the role for managing the social distancing, stuff like that, it falls to police. Police are absolutely overwhelmed, and I suspect as we move into this new system, I do suspect that there'll be a request of local government to step into this space. That makes me extremely uncomfortable.
And watch that space, I guess. Thanks.
Well, Sean is here. I'd say if anyone can follow the traffic light system, it would be Kapiti residents.
Yeah.
Your Worship, the Mayor. Sorry, Councillor Elliott, I'll come to you.
That might have earned the peanut slab, though, Mr. Jefferson, don't you think?
Sorry, the light's with Councillor Elliott. So can I just make sure it's a question, because there's been a few comments and we just want to get through.
Yes, two questions.
Okay, fire ahead.
Just further to this discussion, so what's the story with marches, passive protests, gatherings, that sort of thing, which are more likely to be big events but not going through normal organisational processes?
Again, through the chair, that would fall to police to manage from a public health perspective. We have limited powers in the bylaw. People should be applying for permission to march, those sorts of things. I think you're seeing up and down the country that's not happening. So it still falls to police to manage that. Renee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one further question about roles and responsibilities. You've talked about council's role being through the EQC. I feel as though now is a really, really appropriate opportunity to discuss the actual role of elected members during a lockdown and what to do and what not to do to be helpful to the public and staff.
And just to clarify, I think it's the EOC, which, and for those that don't know, it's the Emergency Operations Centre.
Your EQC is not a harbinger of things to come. No, I'm being naughty. Look, I'll send that booklet out, but primarily, if I summarise it, elected members' role is, packaging the PIM messaging and being that conduit back to community. We've set up an elected member liaison officers to receive your feedback from community. So it's that two-way flow of information to and from community. And Renee may have more to add, but it's largely limited. But I'll send that booklet through.
Yeah, so just an answer to your question about the passive protests and things like that. So as James mentioned, the police are responsible for that, but we as emergency management, as response managers, we're aware of when things are happening and we liaise with the police, and the police let us know kind of how many people were there and were they following. So last time I think there was some kind of protest outside here and they sent a couple of police along just to educate, I think the right term is, and just to make sure that they were following those guidelines, and as a result nothing came out of that. But yeah, we're certainly aware and have visibility over those kind of events and how they should be handled.
We've been going for a wee while on this, but because it is COVID and it's important, I've allowed the discussion to keep going. We've still got a few more questions. From my perspective as an elected member and in previous years going through the civil defence emergency response training and so forth, I think it's important to remember our role as one of leadership, and in terms of just following those instructions around repeating the official messaging and not confusing that, but also as governance and not getting into organising what staff are where and how many, and that's James and his team's role. So the key thing for us is actually that we remember where we are and allow James and his team of 25 to 60 to do the work that they're doing and provide that information back, but then it's up to them in terms of how that's managed and so forth. I've sort of held off a couple of questions that I've had, and then I'll come to, so I'll raise them now and then come to His Worship. Mid-Central DHB and Capital Coast DHB, I mean, just from my perspective, from an Ōtaki perspective, have there been any issues or challenges or confusion around that cross-border stuff? And I think specifically there's some numbers that came out of people going, yay, we're doing really well, 78% or 80%, and I'm like, I'm not so sure whether Ōtaki is actually in those numbers. So that one there, and I've got a second one.
Yeah, look, thank you. It is, and again, if you go to that bottom bullet point, through the August-September lockdown, actually Mid-Central, we were easier to extract information from, particularly around where the vaccination and the testing centres were going to be. So that certainly was a significant improvement on last year. And CCDHB, I'm trying to pick my words carefully. There's room for improvement in terms of that thing. I think we are seeing that. We're now, the CE is regularly getting I think weekly updates from the CCDHB. My own feeling is that Kapiti, because we're out on the periphery, we sometimes can be forgotten about.
All right, thank you. The second one, which I can't phrase as a question, so it's more of a comment. What I found challenging as an elected member around sharing that communication. So through the first lockdown, I very studiously shared the official lines and so forth. It got to the point where the feedback that I was getting was that they're just over it. And actually they're hearing it from the community page, they're hearing it from the councillor, multiple councillors, from the council, from COVID-19. And so that is the challenge for us as elected members. We're not disagreeing with the advice that you're providing there, but the country has got to the point somewhat where they want to move on to kind of the next phase. So that, I guess what I'm trying to signal there is that does provide a challenge for us as elected members. Certainly want to play my part, but people have gotten sick of hearing updates daily and bits and pieces. I don't know if you've got any feedback on that in terms of the role that we play.
I'd welcome what, and not for this forum, but maybe just feedback about what better would look like, because I think we're at saturation point, and really that's kind of what I'm saying. And bullet point 2 was that just massive amount of information coming through, and you go, what do I read, what do I don't? How do you package that in a way that's accessible for a community, that's meaningful? And it is a challenge for all of the partner agencies, and I'd welcome, just even drop me an email what you think community would prefer to hear. And I know we've got a really responsive PIM team, and if we can make it happen, we will. But I agree. I think we're at that hard end now. We're in that last 10-15%, and I think we're saturated with information.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, certainly I'd share if there was a level change. That's something that I would make sure that I would share, but I'm just not sharing every bit of COVID-related information. Were you wanting to say something there?
I'll just make a really unhelpful comment. In the last 2 years during COVID, when we're desperate to make sure our health services are working optimally, who would initiate a complete restructure of the health sector and carry it on? It's just a question.
I don't know if there's anyone here to answer that. Your Worship.
You standing orders and overrule that question. The issue of mandatory vaccination certificates, is a challenging area for local government. The Chief Executive gave a fairly good response to the same question in the audit and risk, in terms of what our responsibilities are in the vaccination area as an organisation, plus response to questions raised from the community, especially our demographics, where we've got highly susceptible populations, about their wish for vaccination certificates to be used when they are using council services like swimming pools, libraries. And I read today's paper that 40% of the workforce is now, through the government's move, mandatory vaccination. So it's coming. So would appreciate you repeating some of the observations you made last time, and anything else you want to add.
Darn, what did I say? Perhaps the Mayor and Councillor Buswell can remember. So it's a fraught space, obviously. I'll work through that. So it's a fraught space, and it's evolving, and everybody would like certainty, but people feel their personal rights are being impinged if that certainty is a mandation of things like vaccination. And yet, if you're on the front line and you are putting yourself and others at risk, or in a riskier situation, we need to know what to do. So Taituara is working on a sector-wide policy response. What I said at Audit and Risk was that's going a little slowly, a little too slowly for everybody. So unfortunately, most councils are working through themselves, their own responses, and then talking to each other. We belong to an organisation whose name I'll probably get wrong, but it's the New Zealand Health and Safety Business Leaders Forum. And because their focus is health and safety, one of the benefits is they've provided some really good guidance documents that we can utilise ourselves and that I've shared around the region. And it starts with essentially a leadership statement about how you feel about COVID and what the right responses are. And I would endorse what they've said without saying that this is our policy, because it's not at this point. But what they've said is vaccination is the only effective risk mitigation for COVID. And if you subscribe to that, then what follows, is pretty intuitive. But what we're obliged to do, if we want to require a vaccination of our staff, is we're required to undertake risk assessments of those roles, so that we have a good justification for why we might mandate or why we might not, if indeed that were the decision. So most organisations are currently working through that, and unfortunately, unless or until the government mandates it for everybody, we're obliged to take a proper risk assessment focus to those roles, review those roles for how at risk are they and how much risk do they put other people at. Now the challenge for us is going to be whether or not we're able to insist at the end of that if people are vaccinated they can come to work. If they're not, we may, and unwilling to, we may well need to look at whether we can provide a way for them to work away from the office, so work from home. Or we may be in a position where we can say it's a requirement. We're certainly weaving it into future job descriptions so that people coming on board know that it's likely to be a requirement that they're vaccinated. And we will keep you updated once we land our own policy work and decision making on what we will do in that space, because clearly there'll be some impact on the governance part of this organisation as well that you may need to make decisions about.
So for the avoidance of doubt,
Part two to that, in terms of the services that we introduce.
just to your mic.
Services that we, requiring our clients or customers to carry the certificates. I mean, it's a fraught area, but it's...
Yeah, we're still looking to take the lead nationally on that stuff and not try and make it up for ourselves. But yes, I mean, to give you a different example, our water treatment staff have always had to have a range of inoculations, so tetanus, TB, not sure what else, I'll get it wrong probably, but sorry, hepatitis, thank you, councillor, you were listening the other day. And as far as I know, that's an understanding, because if you work in a sensitive area of water treatment, there's no question for those staff that they need to be very safe in terms of the impact they can have on the community. So adding things like COVID vaccination is essentially a no-brainer, really. But the same thing does apply across many of our other things. And of course, yes, as you said, we've got customer-facing places where we need to know, is it going to be a requirement and how will you prove it? And if not, can we require you to leave? And that's why we have security guards in some of our facilities at the moment, is just to help with basic things, whereas we know some people don't want to observe respect for others, really. So wearing a mask, for example, is just respecting others as much as your own health. So it's not yet, it's really in a grey area, and we would hope to encourage people to do the sensible thing. We would hope that people can see, and Natasha's statement about it's a disease for the unvaccinated, pandemic of the unvaccinated. Logically, you've only got to look at the facts of who gets hospitalised and who gets very, very unwell. But I do appreciate that there are a lot of other reasons, both personal, religious or other perhaps, why people might be concerned about those things. We need to help people work through that. And, I would love it that everybody signed up to the same thing. But if not, we are going to take that national lead about whether it's going to become a requirement.
And I'm going to come to Mr. Jefferson, but just for the avoidance of doubt, I imagine doing a risk assessment for 330 plus employees is no small task. So again, when we talk about adding burdening workload to the existing organisation, just simply that alone, assessing individual roles, I imagine would be a reasonable sized task. So Mr. Jefferson.
Yeah, look, just very briefly, an observation. One of the emerging things that's happening locally, and I suspect nationally, over the last week or so is for building inspections and public health inspections, the clients and customers are asking, are your staff double vaxxed? and they can only come on site. So that's an interesting flip on that, and that's just started to emerge. So I think that traffic light system really is the harbinger of it's the vaccination passport that will free the country up.
Thank you, James. Councillor Hanford, and then I'm going to go back to Natasha after this question.
Yeah, cool. I feel like this question's kind of somewhat been answered, but I'm keen to have a bit more clarity on whose role, or is there any part of our role or the EOC's role in correcting misinformation that's quite clearly kind of out there, or are we just kind of putting out the facts and kind of leaving it at that, or does someone have a role to kind of actively be aware of where there is really kind of clear and strong pockets of misinformation within the community that we can actually someone can try and kind of target that?
Is really vexatious, and that the PIM team comms team will work to correct that and redirect people to more official sources of information. I think at national level that's something certainly I know that NEMA and our partners REMO are constantly kicking back up through that chain. But if it's local and it's particularly off cue, then we will try and correct that.
I reckon Kathy, she'll sort them out. Set Kathy onto them. All right, I'm back to Natasha. Councillor Hallett, sorry, it wasn't up on the screen
Sorry, I
earlier.
just had one question, and it might be an obvious one, but let's talk about vaccination certificates. I know when I got my second jab, they weren't worried whether they gave me a little piece of paper in regards to it or not. So how are people proving that they've been double vaccinated as such? Or is there a process to get a certificate?
Over to Natasha.
Yes, so there is. The government has said that there will be vaccination certificates available from the end of this month, I think is what they've been saying. They're working on a system. What they've done at this stage is set up a website which is called My Health. And you can, I'm pretty sure that's what it is. I'll clarify if I haven't got that quite right. You can go on and register using your health number, and that'll be the place where once they're available, you're able to download a vaccination certificate from. There's multiple ways you can sign in using your RealMe profile or other sources as well. So it's a work in progress with the government at the moment. And there's, I imagine, despite it looking like there's not a lot going on, there are many people behind the scenes beavering away, finding the right way they can make vaccination certificates in a way that's going to be robust and not easily able to be forged and things like that, for example.
All right, so we're going to move through to the last three slides. Just again to reiterate, we've spent quite a bit of time on this topic, but one, we had a light agenda, and two, it's an important topic. So just wanted to make that really clear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And there is a few more than three slides, but I can move through a few of them reasonably quickly. So I'll touch on a little bit on the impact on the community from the lockdown, our response to it, and also want to touch a little bit on some of the business response as well as our economic and other indicators as well. So just first up on that, from a food security point of view, no surprises given the signals that are being sent around inflation. Food prices are up compared with the same time last year. In terms of food bank demand during the recent lockdown, you see the numbers there, around about, does it look like all up just over 400 food parcels, including particularly, I guess, in the Kapiti food bank line, you'll see there's 51 new registrations, so a sign that there are increasingly people who haven't had to seek assistance who are needing it now when we go into lockdown. In terms of one of the council's response, one of the things that we did do, as we did with the level 4 lockdown last year, we did look at providing some rent relief for some of our commercial tenants. It was granted to 7 tenants for 4 weeks, with a couple who actually got 6 weeks because they were walk-in retail premises there. And total sum of just over $17,000 revenue from the council. Just in terms of the business outreach that the economic development team led during the lockdown, there were 3 particular objectives they focused on: supporting resilience in our economy, loving local, and encouraging connections, communication, and kindness. And I'll just briefly touch on each of those. In terms of the first item, they did leverage the Kapiti Coast NZ web page to promote and raise awareness of the available business support from government, and also through that promoted information for both workers and employers so that people knew it was available, and encouraged use of the official lines of communication from the government. They also went through a process of identifying what support requirements were not available, and that led to some online promotion of our local businesses. So they went through a process where they were actually calling many businesses and finding out what they were going through and what they might need. Unsurprisingly, through that, it was determined that hospitality was the one that was being hardest hit, and support for those businesses who were planning to operate at level 3 was prioritised, followed by the click and collect retail. In terms of Loving Local, there was creation of dedicated Love Local area on the Kapiti Coast NZ website, and promotion was also used through the existing Love Local Facebook group, and both of those, the website and the Facebook group, got a big uptick in the number of people who are active on those pages. They also used some visitor attraction promotion and looked at encouraging sort of family fun as well. Encouraging connection, communication and kindness. I'll highlight the bottom point there. The team engaged directly with businesses on a regular basis through email newsletters and phone calls asking for feedback. And some of the feedback they got from people just because of that outreach was people really appreciated that personal connection being made, and that council was checking in. They felt that someone was actually was caring and paying attention to them in a difficult time. Just a little bit more detail on this slide about the actual website activity. So there was a business hub page that was created to communicate the COVID-19 information, including the rules and requirements, to the business community. And there were 6 new web pages that were created under the Love Local web page that was focused on providing a single source of information where locals who are wanting to use and support local businesses could go to find out what businesses were operating. And that was really successful. Just to highlight, I guess, a couple of pieces of feedback that the team received in relation to some of that activity. So from one of the hospitality businesses came back and said, "Thanks for checking in and good luck. We really all need help in this industry right now, so it's great to have council support." Another business said, "Thanks to you and your team for making a great contribution for the local people and businesses." Somebody else came back and said, "This is such a great initiative for small local businesses." So it was really nice for the team to get that validation that the time and effort they were spending on doing that was greatly appreciated by the business community. Just turning now to recovery monitoring, and then I'll talk on to the recovery indicators and what we're seeing happening out there. In terms of the recovery action plan, as you know, this was adopted just over a year ago, and over that time the focus has been very much on delivering those activities and winding them into our business as usual activities as well. Of particular note, a lot of the action delivery has been bedded in through the economic development strategy as well as other work programs. And I guess it's been reinforced through what we know, what we anticipate is coming, what we've seen happening over the last year, that's absolutely the right approach to have been taken. So we're quite comfortable with where things are at with that, even though there's still a lot of unknowns. And recovery indicators, the current measures that we're looking at, so there is a data set that Remo is reporting on was started off monthly. It's a little bit less frequently now. That monitors around 20 different indicators so that we can understand regionally what the picture is looking like from a recovery point of view, but also some of those indicators break down to district levels as well, and I'll touch on a couple of those shortly. So in terms of where things are at on the economic front, we are seeing that people on job seeker support is down, but it is still well above pre-COVID levels. Business confidence is up despite the latest Delta outbreak, and new job advertisements continue to rise. I will just note there that some of the indicators that I am about to take you through are updated until June, so they won't show the Delta impact. So Kapiti Coast economy is showing considerable strength in its post-lockdown period. So in the year to June, Infometrics has estimated the economic activity locally grew by 4.6%, and that compares to the Wellington region growth of 4.2%. So we are edging out others in the region, and I think that is largely due to the increased level of people working from home. Likewise, similar pattern with consumer spending. We are what's happening locally is above what's happening in New Zealand. You see on the left-hand side of this, the 10.3% in green is Kapiti Coast, and that's an average annual percentage change from June 2020 to June 2021, and that compares to a New Zealand average of 7.7%. Just a few other economic indicators there. Employment levels for those living in Kapiti has risen to 2.1%. Estimated unemployment rate is very low at 3.8, below the national figure of 4.7. Consumer spending, which I've just talked to, is up 10%. And the last bullet point there, Kapiti is benefiting from increased domestic tourism, with visitor spending growing 13% over the year to June, compared to 7.3% in the Wellington region and 5.4% nationally. So there's some really positive indicators coming through there. In terms of the regional dashboard, which I referred to earlier, what we'll see, so they're COVID cases there, don't worry, that's not regionally, that's nationally. A couple of indicators which I'll refer to in a bit more detail certainly shortly. Mental health statistics remain stable regionally, but Kapiti has seen an increase in two particular stress indicators there. There is a bit of a 2 to 3 month lag because some of the data sets we draw from are nationally collated, so again are not necessarily reflective of the latest outbreak. But just pulling into those couple of community stress indicators which are not looking so flash at the moment. This one here graphs over time the threats or attempts on suicide locally. The lighter pink line is Kapiti, and you'll see as of June there's a real peak in Kapiti there. Now I guess one thing I would note is that all of the lines you'll see wobble a fair bit over time. So what we're going to be watching carefully is to know whether or not that's actually an upwards trend or has just been a little bit of an upwards blip over a shorter period of time. And likewise with this one, police responses to mental health call-outs locally. Again, Kapiti looks like it's in at the upper level compared to other districts in the region there. It's not far up, but again, it's going to be one for us to watch. And that one there you can see we're about even with about middle of the pack there. Housing pressure, which is another significant thing that we've talked about in terms of recovery. We're still seeing quite very high housing pressure. As you'll know, we've got a special work program focused in on that at the moment, so I won't spend a lot of time going through this. Two particular things I will just highlight though. The number of people in emergency housing might have dropped slightly, but the amount of time that people are spending in emergency housing is continuing to increase. And particularly in Kapiti, we've now got a regional average that's upwards of 20 weeks, which is not it's not a pretty picture at all. And that just shows that there's a lack of housing for people to move out of emergency housing into. And the other one I'll just highlight there, 207 people on the social housing register as of June. It peaked around 220 during the first lockdown, so it's dropped a little bit, but not a lot. The other thing that the regional recovery monitoring does is it does do a quarterly survey of community sentiment across the region and pulls in survey responses from a range of different organisations, including community-based organisations who are working with vulnerable sectors of the community. So just a couple of things to highlight there in terms of what the latest community sentiment survey indicates. So 58% of respondents indicated that they were concerned or very concerned about the current situation, which was an increase on the previous quarter. And the next one down, 63% of responders indicated that they were concerned or very concerned about the next 6 months ahead. Slightly lower increase, but still an increase there. So people are starting to be concerned about what the next 12 months is going to bring. Just now to touch on, I guess we've covered some of this already, and through some of the questioning through to James. But just in terms of organisational readiness, we've got ongoing business continuity planning underway, which supports our organisational preparedness. One thing in particular that we know we will need to be doing in the next short period of time is going to be getting a much better understanding of that new traffic light system and what that's going to mean for us across different parts of our business. And the second bullet point there is we're very conscious, as has come through in some of the responses from the Chief Executive, of that organisational impact on our business of usual work if we change alert levels, and there's a staff wellbeing component of that as well in terms of the extra pressure it puts on people in the organisation. Next slide I had was about elected members' support, which we've already feel like or elected members' role, which we have already traversed quite a lot in this conversation, so I'll skip past that. And then just to, I guess, go back to where we started from with this is in terms of the formal review of the recovery plan is we will be coming back as part of the policy work program with a revised timing of when that's going to happen. It may be that actually we end up deferring it for quite some time, just until we know where things are going to, what direction things are going to head in. And in the interim, our focus is going to continue to be to support the government-led response. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Natasha. I thought you said 3, it must have been 30.
I went through them quickly.
I did have a note for myself to go to Councillor Randall, but I see his picture's dropped away. Is he still there?
He's away.
Okay, all right, I'll try and remember.
No, I'm here, Mr. Chair.
Hey, Bernie, just checking if you have any questions, because I didn't check in with you earlier when we paused for questions.
Yeah, I was aware of that, but I kept quiet on that. I'd just like to say thanks to Renee and James for the work they've been doing.
All right, thanks for that, Bernie. They're nodding and showing great appreciation and thumbs up. Councillor Deputy Mayor Holborough.
Yeah, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So I wanted to go back to the discussion around the unemployment rate, which was described as a positive, the low unemployment rate being positive. So now the unemployment rate has plunged to 3.4%, according to an article by Stuff yesterday, and it was a big discussion about it on the radio today. And it's indicating actually a worker shortage across the country. Do you want to make any comment about that locally? Have we had any reports of that?
Yes, so low unemployment isn't necessarily always a good thing when it gets down to a point where actually you can't find people to do the work you need to do. I might just hand over to, I don't know if it's either Darren or Mark who want to talk in terms of the workforce plan work that we've been doing has been really helping to draw out a local picture of where employers are at.
I'll just let one of you grab a microphone, and just while you are, I don't know about Councillor Buswell, but as an employer, shortages have been well before the announcement yesterday. I think at least the last 6 to 12 months it's been difficult for most sectors to find staff. Speaking to my mechanic, certainly they're struggling to find skilled people as well. So Mark, over to you.
Kia ora tātou councillors, and through you, Chair. The workforce plan looks very much at the space of the demand for employees, and it helps by putting in place pathways right from school leavers through the tertiary system, through people looking to develop their careers further, through to better jobs in our economy. And so these pressures, it's great to see a low unemployment rate, but actually that creates an even greater headache for many of our businesses, which are quite small, and therefore each employee that they employ is a very large part of their workforce, sometimes 50% of their workforce, just getting one person on board, because all our businesses are quite small. So this is a major issue for us on the coast, and that's why the workforce plan couldn't come at a better time.
If I could give some context to that too, and have the obviously the opportunity to do that as chair, from our own experience, it can also see businesses downscaling. So I know a number of businesses that have either downscaled or haven't expanded because they simply can't even staff their existing level of staffing. So it can actually stunt growth. I can see Mark nodding down the back there as well, but I know a number of businesses that have openly said that they would expand their business if only they could find staff. So it does have a negative impact from that perspective as well. Just want to check before I move on. Okay, Councillor McCann.
With your permission, I just really want to make a comment. I found the slides very helpful around areas like food bank and housing, but I'd like to make a comment to councillors. I'm not sure that they show some of the deprivation that's been caused when the increase in renting is eating up so much of working poor and people who are retired in terms of their income. And having with other councillors, we attended the food bank's AGM, and they were noticing a new group of people having to access their services. So while some of the numbers look very positive, I think that there is a good chunk of our community that are really suffering considerably because a significant amount of their income is being eaten up in a way that it wasn't. So while we're all doing great work here, I think there's some really large issues in our community that I'm not sure how we can address as a council.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Buswell.
Thanks for the presentation. I found a couple of slides really interesting, particularly around the suicide rates or attempted suicide rates in Kapiti, which is really concerning. And I'm just wondering whether at some stage councillors could be briefed a little bit more in depth into those statistics. And I say that as a response to a briefing that we had last triennium around alcohol harm in our district, and what demographics that actually affected was quite overwhelming for us in our community. Just not understanding the deprivation and the isolation that our older community actually goes through. So I would be really interested to see whether we can tap into those figures a little bit more, just as a council briefing in the future.
So that data is sourced from New Zealand Police, so we have to think about what the most appropriate way of getting that information to you would be. Yeah.
Kathy.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Coates, Chairman. I wanted to say thank you very much. I think it's really important that Council is supporting loving local and buy local. I think it's really, really important. But I just had a curly question, if I may, please, for Renee. Now, during some of our meetings pre-pandemic, which is going back a couple of years now, Renee was really good and actually predicted that a pandemic is something they were expecting. But from memory, through our conversations, Renee was talking about it comes in 3 waves, and I'm just wondering if Renee knows what wave we're in or how they're seeing it, or is this pandemic different than others previously? Thank you.
No pressure, Renee.
Yeah, just the easy questions for me. So when we refer to pandemics coming in waves, it's not necessarily like a tsunami where there's very distinct kind of waves coming in. And in terms of 3 waves, it would be 3 or more than it comes in stages. And certainly if you look at a chart of our case numbers, you can see there's some quite clear waves there. Whether or not those waves are going to increase or get bigger, I couldn't really say. But certainly it is following a consistent pattern of every other pandemic that we've experienced in history, when I would expect to see continuing, well, in my opinion, I would say we're going to see continuing waves, and what the height of those waves, I'm not sure. Unless we get our vaccination rates high.
Thanks, Renee. Look, I'm going to wrap it up there, team. As I said, we've had a good crack at that, and it's an important topic. So thanks to the staff that contributed to the conversation. I think Mr. Jefferson's going to circulate some material which will help us understand our roles and so forth. Just a comment from me in finishing up. Appreciate that this is not our doing. And the parting comment that I wanted to make is that it's, from what I'm hearing from people, and even my wife who's been looking at the operational side for our business, it's far from simple. So this coming into practice, or whatever we want to refer it to, isn't necessarily making it easier for people out there. And so there is a level of confusion with people, and I note even for council around some of our facilities and so forth, around what you can and can't do and so forth. So I just wanted to kind of, I'm sure that you're aware of that, but just I certainly don't see this as a turning point and suddenly things are simple, and it's really clear and stop, go and run the orange. Not that I do that, just to be really clear. So look, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for the team that have contributed. I am mindful that we've been going for a wee while, and the next step is to move into publicly excluded. So I just want to get some guidance around, and then go into public excluded after that. Yeah. So we're going to take a 10-minute break, coffee stop and a toilet stop, and then we'll come back in. For community board members, when we do move to public exclusion, because of the nature of some of the information in that, not included in that discussion, unfortunately. So you're welcome to stick around until we come back, or to mosey on. So I'll leave that up to you guys. Thank you. So 20 past 11, team.